Hello.
Hello, apologies for the technical difficulties there.
Thought it was me. I like called in and I was like, because I'm usually not good at this stuff. There we go. Oh, there's Mike. Is Mike is Mike in person?
I am in person. I'm just trying to get my glitches worked out here in Zoom. Hi, everybody.
Oh, there you are. You're on the
Yep.
webinar too. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were in person. I was gonna have you run it tonight since I'm not in person either. That's okay.
I'd be happy to, but after 10 hours of wearing a mask, that was about my limit. So
Yeah, exactly.
August is here if you'd like to turn that over to him.
I mean, I don't mind doing it. Just I think it's a little harder on Zoom though, because I can't see the audience.
There's no
audience.
Oh, well, then I'll go ahead and do it. It's just I don't like it because I can't see people. So we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And at whatever time, 6:12, a little late, but that's okay. We're all here. So the first thing is, Ben, he's joking with me, a ceremonial meeting opening. I never go to city council because I don't live in the city, but I didn't realize they did the Pledge of Allegiance. So when I found that out, I thought we should add that, but Ben thought we should have a quick discussion whether that's a good idea or something else to open our meetings. So I'm open to any comments about that.
Something else, what, like quotes from Lord of the Rings or what?
What's that?
In my past experience, the planning commission never did anything in particular as a beginning, unlike the city council.
Okay. I don't know. So Mike, do they do anything for like the county planning commission?
the county planning commission instituted the Pledge of Allegiance in the last couple of years. It seems kind of a standard opening for a lot of meetings, but to August's, mentioned that we haven't had one before. I don't know if it's necessary to include it, but it would certainly be something that many other meetings do include as an opening. So I think it would be up to our consensus if we want to add it.
Okay. All right. Well, what does everybody think about that? We can discuss it at the next meeting, whether they think it's a good idea or not. And I just heard that and I was like, oh, that's actually not such a bad idea. But again, it's not, I don't want to take up a lot of time on something like that. So why don't we think about it and everybody tell me what you think at our next meeting in October.
I'd like to suggest that we have Mike Beck sing the Star Spangled Banner.
Or he could recite the preamble to the Constitution. I'd like to see that.
A rotating stock of patriotism. We could just pick something and a commissioner every month. Okay, Jeff, you're going to have to sing next month.
As long as one of you guys wears a wig, okay, like George Washington had, then I'll be good.
In lieu of the Pledge of Allegiance, let's all wear wigs.
All right, that's enough of that. We're moving on. So for anybody that dialed in, it's raise your hand if you want to comment, and it's *6 to mute and or to unmute, and then *9 to raise your hand. It's on the agenda. So moving right along for the minutes from July 12th. And Ben, I got a little confused about the August 9th minutes until I looked at the agenda. Do we have to approve those even though we didn't have a meeting?
You don't have to, but it's here to note that the meeting was canceled.
Okay, because I was like, wait, I thought I wasn't supposed to be there. I thought maybe you guys had some kind of secretive meeting and uninvited me or something. I was like, what happened on August 9th? So.
Oh yeah,
Okay,
you see those minutes, they're heavily redacted.
That's what all those black pages in my agenda are from. Okay.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any additions, comments, or anything for the July 12th, 2021 meeting minutes?
No.
I move approval of the minutes.
I'd second that.
All right, so we have a second. So I'll start with yes on me. I'll everybody go around.
Aye.
Mike's and I. Okay,
Yes.
okay,
Art is aye.
Aye.
alrighty. We got everybody? Okay, thank you. All right, public comment period for items not elsewhere on the agenda. And I'll give it a couple of seconds if anybody wants to unmute or raise their hand. I think we got one hand up there. Ben,
Yeah, they have the ability to unmute.
who is it?
I believe that's
Aye.
Mary's number.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yes,
Hi.
it is.
Who is it?
Okay. Yeah, it kept kicking me off, and that. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Mary.
I just want to let you all know the Stevenson Grange number 121 will be having a program on September 28th at the it'll be a Zoom program through the Stevenson events pages. And we have invited Kyle Dissner from the Portland Planning Department to speak to us on the donut economic theory.
Oh,
And he is the Climate Action Program Coordinator at the City of Stevenson, or Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. He's a policy analyst and lead author for Portland's 2015 Climate Action Plan. Excuse me, I have a little helper here. Her name is Sasha or Kusha, and she wants to help. Kyle oversees Portland's community-wide city operations, and he's working on the city's sustainable consumption strategy, which seeks to understand the role of governments in reducing global emissions produced with when local consumers purchase goods and materials made in other parts of the world. And briefly, he's going to give us an overview, and there will be a question and answer period. And he'll discuss the components of the donut economic framework and how it can be used to think through environmental, social, and economic challenges. And Portland has used the donut economic framework on various projects, but it hasn't been used more broadly. And he actually worked with Kate Raward, who is the author of the donut economic theory. She's an economist. And he'll share approaches and lessons learned in the city of Portland through the Thriving Cities Initiative, a partnership between C40 and the Donut Economics Action Lab, which is Kate Raward's lab. So I think he's a very important person for planners to listen to. To me, he sounded very young, but he's got a lot of experience. And he was quoted in the article in Yes Magazine on how to keep our ecosystems sustainable. It was in the first quarter, Yes Magazine, and it is at our library. And I believe I sent you all a link to it too. So I invite all of you to come, especially Ben. I'm going to invite gorge-wide planners, and I'm speaking to the Gorge Commission tomorrow, and we'll be inviting them too. I think that this theory is very important. How are you going to live within your means and preserve your ecosystem at the same time have a quality of life? It might be able to be done. I'm not so sure, but maybe somebody will teach us how to do it in the future. So, and just one more thing, excuse me. We are having a plant and seed and bulb swap too on the second weekend of November. So start saving your seeds and plants and bulbs, and we'll have it outside by the courthouse annex. I think we'll get permission again to put up our tents and that. So I invite all of you to do that too. Thank you.
thanks, Mary. And Johanna, I'm sure you know that was Mary Rapar.
Mary, thanks for that. Yeah. Quick question too, if
send
it's
you
going
all
to be on
something.
Zoom.
It's going to be on that, what do they call that? Google Zoom, whatever it's called,
Mhm.
Google Talk or something like that. And you have to pre-register through the Stevenson Library events calendar. It's just so that you get the hyperlink in your email. So yeah, I'll send Ben something and he can pass it on to you all too.
Great. Thank you, Mary. Really much appreciated.
You're
All right.
welcome.
Moving along to new business, Planning Commission bylaws, conscientious, God, you're making these words too big for me. Conscientious public involvement amendment, first review. It's all yours, Ben.
Okay, so this is what you had tasked me with coming out of that public involvement subcommittee that we did. That was more related to the residential building capacity, but grew out to be this more general. How do we ensure that we're making conscientious decisions about who we involve and how we involve them, and how are we presenting those decisions to the public over time? So you asked me to work with Tracy Grotto on this, and we did. She was going to try to be here tonight, but couldn't be. I think that one of our phone-in calls might be Phil Crawford, who she said might be attending to help speak to that. So if it is, we'll definitely allow them to speak. But what you have is a draft amendment to your bylaws. As stated in the bylaws, it needs to appear in writing in one planning commission meeting, and then it can be voted upon in the next meeting. So this proposed amendment is what Tracy and I came up with. It adds a section for public involvement, and then provides this appendix framework at the end of it. There's some preamble in the appendix about what public involvement means, and then an explanation of what that framework is, and when, and just how many steps in a process where you're considering ordinance changes, say, you might be thinking about the appropriate public involvement strategy. Can kind of distill some of it down into exhibits B1 and the duplicate exhibit B1 with, and the other duplicate exhibit B1. We should update those numbers. But so here's the first one is the visual framework saying that here's a call to action, and that can be made by anybody. It represents some disturbance, an opportunity, an issue, a problem, some request. And then if the planning commission decides to answer that call, first establishing that conscientious strategy of how we define the issue, how we inform and educate the public on the issue, engage stakeholders. And once we engage stakeholders, going into the process of refining an approach to that issue, refining potentially, it could lead to reconsideration of whether you'll answer the call to action. But this template is something that we can update each time, saying what strategies were selected by the planning commission when they undertook this project, and have a "you are here" arrow to put on the website, or include in planning commission packets on the topic as it moves forward. Then there's the ideas from the committee about different ways to involve, the menu of public involvement methods. Some of those are specific to inform, educate, and outreach, and then the other ones are methods to engage. The key there being that it's a bi-directional conversation. Engaging the public means that the planning commission is putting something out there and then listening to what the public puts out there in response, as a more in-depth way to involve public in decision making. So that is what's in front of you. I don't see a hand come up or request to unmute from the one call in, but I'm happy to address any questions you have, or incorporate any changes for consideration at the next meeting.
And then I've looked this over a couple of times here over the last few days. And I think it's an accurate reflection of the conversations that we had in the committee and what we had here at the planning commission meeting. So, I don't have any additional thoughts or comments to add here. I'm anxious to see us sort of put that into our bylaws and make it work. So, yeah, I guess my feeling is that I'll be voting yes for it at the next meeting. So, I think it looks good. And I appreciate the work that you and Tracy did to sort of smooth out this, the sort of rough spots and take what we discussed at that last planning commission meeting.
I concur. I didn't see any red flags, and that second appendix was, I think, fairly covered the public involvement. So I probably am going to be on board as well.
I thought it was a good chart. The visuals are always nice for people to be able to see things and break stuff down. So it's a little easier to understand. Yeah, I have nothing but admiration for the content.
Yeah, and this is Mike. I'd like to say a big thanks to Ben, Jeff, and all the members of the committee that helped put this together. Certainly, Ben, a good work on the final end here, bringing this draft proposal before us. The only concerns I would have, or just issues that I would just raise here briefly before presenting it to us for a version for adoption, would be, my request would be, one would be to just amend the language somewhat in the flyer example. In my experience, change may be a dirty word in planning, and I think we should revise that example to strike the word change with something more innocuous. I don't know what a good example would be at this present time, but as opposed to change could be coming to your neighborhood, just seems strongly worded. And then the second would be, are we empowered to call for public referendum votes? I don't know if that's something that the Planning Commission could request, or if that's a power that's reserved to the city council to bring before the voters. And that was the only other thing I noticed. Other than that, it's an excellent structure and framework to move forward with increasing the potential for public involvement in the planning process.
Thanks, Mike. I had one question, Ben, on page 10 of 19. Well, it's actually 17 in the right-hand corner. I guess it depends on which numbering system you're looking at. It's the order of speaking presented by the chair.
Mhm.
And it's pretty similar to what we typically would do if we're having a hearing. But once you kind of get down a little ways, once you get past everyone has an opportunity to speak, then you have the comments from applicants in response and rebuttal, but new material can't be introduced. And I'm wondering what that's about.
So this is within that section for public hearing. So, and it relates to, I'm off guard a little bit on this, but it relates to what an open record public hearing is and what a closed record public hearing is. And
Okay.
so the concept there being that when it's an open record, you're asking for the public to provide information for the Planning Commission's consideration about an application. This is specific to applications, not to policy discussions. So at some point, the submittal of new information needs to end so that you can close the record on that and say, given everything that we know, everything that was submitted by the application, all the information provided by the public, given everything we know, this is what we're making a decision on. And so where this, that statement comes in about not providing additional information would be that that record is closed. All the information that we need, we have at this point. We can clarify it if necessary, but we need to close the record at some point.
So what would happen in a situation where maybe a proponent or opponent brings up some historical document that hadn't been presented to the planning commission prior, would we then set aside the hearing and continue it in the following month once we had more information on that topic? I mean, how would that work?
You certainly can. So
Okay,
in just this, that information should come out during the comments from proponents or opponents or any others wishing to speak. It should be introduced first at that stage.
okay,
And then if that information is something that causes you all pause, you can say, all right, we need to really digest this more. And you can continue the public hearing until a later date that you all would set at that time.
okay,
Can we
marvelous.
request additional information?
Certainly.
Okay,
You
and
can ask for clarification on a point or anything like that, but it shouldn't be new stuff coming in at the last minute.
right,
Kind of how that.
Well, I understand, but I'm also looking at a situation where you go through a hearing and it's been presented. We've heard from the proponents, we've heard from other interested parties and opponents. And a member of the planning commission has a question. Now, I could
That's still
generally,
before that.
that,
The one right before that is questions from the commission members.
oh, there's another
Yeah,
one further down too.
yeah, we're talking about the very last one.
So I just want to make sure that we're not foreclosing the option of having someone respond to a question because information was not provided
Yeah,
either by the proponent or by someone else.
that's after all of that kind of, like Ben says, it's just closing down the, we're not taking any more new information now.
okay. Yeah, that's what I was trying to understand. Thank you. And yeah, I think this looks great, Ben, and it's obviously a lot of work. When I see a lot of red, I know you're busy. So I think we can talk about this and perhaps vote on it next meeting. In the meantime, Ben, if there are other clarifications, is it okay for me to just email you, or because I haven't had a chance to really read this in detail?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It is that, well, you all can read it as well as I can. For the amendments, that is in the very last article. These bylaws may be amended at any regular meeting by
Okay.
affirmative vote of 3 members, provided the proposed amendments have been submitted in writing at a previous regular meeting. So I would be conservative in how I interpret that and say that if you request any changes at that time, Val, that we'll present those in writing, and the first opportunity to adopt them would be at the November meeting then.
Okay, great. And I do like the visual public involvement work template, just like August said, those visuals are good. Is that something we could, perhaps get laminated? I'm trying to think of how it's going to be easy for us to use this process, but then also have, folks that are coming in to speak with us, understand the process. Like how are we going to put this into motion and it, work smoothly?
Yes.
Okay.
Post it or something.
Yeah.
Mike
I
had a
mean, it's
good
great.
comment about muddling through, and we will.
It'll be fine.
No, but ideally, when we have a section of the webpage devoted to any of these issues, I'll be able to update this, post it to the webpage, keep that updated, provide it as a attachment to the evolving commission reports to show where we're at and what's happened.
Great. Does anybody else have any comments or questions about this particular document? Okay. I think we,
Have one last one, just noting in writing that exhibit B2 has been changed and B3 has been added, where they all said exhibit B1.
okay,
I have a written proposal to change those to 2 and 3.
okay. All right. If there's no other comments or questions, I think we can go ahead and move on. Thanks, Ben, for that. That looks really great.
No problem.
Let me get back up to the top of my agenda here. All right, old business. Anything?
Okay. No, we have some reports though to deal with what would be old business.
Okay.
Thoughts of the month, have community submissions about vacation rentals again. And so there are links in there for you guys to read about vacation rentals and how they're being viewed in other communities and the dynamics there. So then there's also a couple links about housing dynamics. One is to a YouTube video by Vox organization that explains, they focus on the Bay Area some, but how various overlapping issues are affecting the price of housing there. It's well explained and applicable in a lot of places. And then there's a Twitter thread by a planner who did the math on the taxes collected by a new development versus the service that development demands. And so in this case, it was the taxes over a 20-year period paid for repaving the road one time. And I haven't read much into all the comments, but the email that forwarded this talked about how all the comments helped to explain that too. So some development is more costly than others to the public agency. Does this work for you all to provide links in the thoughts of the month? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, they're great. I know Mary has provided links before too, and I've watched them. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Makes it quick for me to get to the information.
Great. I'll keep doing that then.
Okay, thank you. All right, are we moving on?
Up to you all.
Oh, I don't know if anybody wanted to talk about any of these links that Ben provided.
I would just comment briefly. The one unicorn startup article, I read that a couple of weeks ago, and it's just an interesting way that homes are being turned into limited liability corporations, the home itself, and then this startup corporation is selling shares in the home, not quite a timeshare, but an equal share in the home's worth. And then those are in effect, some jurisdictions are considering them timeshares or short-term rentals. And there's some conflict between what a corporation can do in ownership of a house, who can own the limited liability corporation. But it's an interesting twist on partitioned or non-full ownership of home residential properties in America. And it seems to be catching on all across the country.
That's interesting. It's kind of like Bitcoin. You can do that with Bitcoin too, That 100 people can buy a work of art, have a little piece of it. Interesting.
I just think that if you look at the long-term contractual relationships you have with shareholders and any stock corporation, having dealt with that myself over the years, you can find yourself in a real difficult situation. in terms of managing an asset. You know,
But the developer is probably long gone.
oh yeah.
Right. It's true.
Sell a share, it gets placed in a trust, and all of a sudden you have a bank, and it's, you know,
Complicated.
well, yeah, it is. I'm not so sure it's really much of an answer to it. Maybe creating more problems than it's answering.
Right.
I think it's a runaround. That's a loophole that's able to be used for a period of time.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you. I think if there are any other comments, we can move on to staff and commission reports.
Okay, I'll kick this off and quickly hand it to Mike if he's ready for it, but the downtown parking analysis is going along. Alex Ralston is here and doing a great job organizing data and information and volunteers, and Mike is your representative to the group on that, so I'll let him talk about it.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, I'm the planning commissioner who is helping out with the parking committee. Although Alex Ralston, our intern, has done the lion's share of the work along with Ben to develop a good process for inventorying the downtown parking spots, both on-street parking and off-street parking. Alex has prepared a gap analysis assessment of the parking spaces on the public streets to determine if more could be fit in to different block faces on the streets. And will also be conducting, under Alex's direction, a parking survey this Thursday and this Saturday between 12 and 6. I don't know if any of the planning commissioners can help out with volunteer 2-hour shifts, but I feel that under Alex's capable guidance and Ben's direction, we've got a good progress in what will be some deliverables at the end of September, by the end of September, from the parking committee and the efforts of Alex. So I would like to turn it over to Alex to deliver some updates in more detail on the parking committee and the progress so far.
And I didn't have him come tonight.
Oh.
Wait until he has some results, but
Okay.
Mike did a good job explaining really what he's producing for you all. So he's producing a census of all the different parking spaces in our downtown area. So we'll know what we have there. He's done the on-street inventory by himself to say that these are all the on-street spaces. They're all this range of widths, or I'm sorry, lengths. And he's reaching out to business owners to verify what his assumptions about how many on-site parking spaces there are. So we'll know how many on-site there are. That's sort of this first layer, what's there. The volunteer effort to collect information will tell us how that's all being used. So we've got our supply study. We have our demand or usage study, just to really understand the existing dynamics, and like Mike described, this third layer of that will show where additional on-street parking can be added if our supply and demand dynamics don't work out, or if growth over time means that we're pressed for the supply that we currently have. Alex's product there in that gap analysis will be turned over to the transportation planning consultants that we have, and they'll estimate what it would cost to fill those gaps. In some cases, it might be something like pouring new sidewalk and moving or reducing the length of a driveway. And so what does that cost? And that'll give the city council in this case the ability to say, is that cost worth it? What are we getting out of that? Do we need to invest in that sort of improvement to gain what may be one space? That's a more extreme example. There are other ways to just better stripe the streets to show where spaces can be gained. And what the committee is challenged with at this time is to understand their own parking behaviors, which show the spaces on the street they're comfortable parking in and which they aren't, and give us a indication of which those are, so we can go to the inventory list and say, okay, that's a 23-foot long space that you always park in. Maybe that's the standard we should shoot for the overall length of spaces downtown. So this is, again, building on what you've all started talking about with the zoning code and what new developments require. This provides more information toward that and will allow you to better refine what that code is for future development.
Ben, I think as you started to touch on there, not all parking spaces are equal. Some are larger, some are smaller. And I wonder if we're looking at the safety issues. I am still, I think, very concerned about the safety issues of parking on 2nd Street. I don't know how many times I've parked on that street and sat there waiting for my partner to go to the store or do something. And I'm sitting there watching someone open a car door and a semi truck pulling over into the oncoming traffic lane to avoid hitting those folks. It's a totally different dynamic if you go down to 1st Street. You have a wider right of way. You don't have those kinds of issues. And I think that's something we ought to be looking at. It could mean you actually reduce parking spots by having parking only on one side of the street so you can have wider travel lanes. But I think that is an issue, particularly as we see more traffic, I think, coming through on 2nd Street in terms of the traffic surveys or statistics they were looking at when we did the downtown plan.
Yeah, Jeff, the issue of safety concerns on 2nd were brought up by several of the committee members in the meetings, and this will be considered as the parking committee moves forward in time. I believe the intent of the parking committee members and the city is to not have this end at the conclusion of Alex's internship, but to continue the parking committee business into next season, potentially coming up with some recommended changes that would be enacted over time, perhaps next summer. I think one of the solutions that was just bandied about at one of the past meetings was directing parkers away from 2nd, to mention that it's easier parking on 1st, it's less stressful, and how to enact actual safety countermeasures on 2nd, I think would be a topic of extended discussion to determine what actually could be done to even make it more palatable for people that want to park on 2nd. I'm sorry, I kind of thought that Alex was going to be in the meeting tonight, Ben, so I apologize for that. I would have been better prepared with an update from the parking committee. But I'd like to thank the members of the public that have and business owners that have chosen to step up to the plate and volunteer on the parking committee. We've got a good degree of interest from several of the business owners around town and some other senior care services personnel from the county. And so I think that the efforts of the parking committee will continue because of the dedicated efforts of the public in this concerns about parking in the city of Stevenson.
Yeah. I will take over then on the Columbia Avenue realignment project.
Does that take into account?
It does. So we've got, that's one that's grant funded, and the scope of that grant isn't fully put together yet. But we have a consultant that we hope to finalize a contract with at this week's city council meeting, and they'll develop the scope of work for the grant agreement between the city and Ecology. In our initial scoping of what that project involves, it's a real bottom to top look at what that realignment would mean. And so at the bottom, we're looking at the soils to see if there's contamination in those soils. We're investigating feasibility strategies to address those soils. We're looking at the market for development of a building. We're engaging the public on what those buildings might look like or should look like. How much parking would be required and what some solutions to that requirement might be for development in that corridor. And then developing a cost assessment so we can do a cost benefit analysis of the project. So it's going to come with substantial costs if we find things at each one of those stages that need to be done. And the city council needs to know what that cost would be, see if there's benefit to the public in doing that project. So parking is definitely one of the things that's been on our mind with that. And with this baseline of information that we're developing, we will have a parking model for what parking dynamics were in September of 2021. They can apply the assumed parking demands of new development along Columbia Avenue to that model to say, if you're going to add another 15 cars, they're likely to park in this area. That either will or won't rise above the threshold of parking problems, and assist you all in making decisions on things like development, but also assist the city council in making decisions on that project specifically. So things
So
are
is the
working together.
consultant going to be developing alternatives? Or is this just sort of one path forward?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. So, like I said, the scope of work between the city and ecology for the grant itself hasn't been developed. And so it's very likely that a scope of options to see where there is a cost benefit threshold will come out of that. But let's move forward. Hope to have that grant signed with ecology this fall still, and really start working on that the last quarter of this year and the first quarter of next year to get it going. Increasing residential building capacity. That's what we've put on hold as we considered the public involvement strategies. And then at the August meeting, we talked about the subcommittee to talk about the residential capacity problem right now and define that. We haven't done any work on that subcommittee yet, and I'll pass it over to Jeff to talk more about that part.
Thanks, Ben. Well, you know, I think Ben's right. We've had some discussions about who should be on that committee, and I know Ben has made some initial contacts. We want to again, I think, sort of broaden the representation to sort of be consistent with the public involvement process that we laid out here to make sure that we have you know, all the right interests at the table. So, you know, hopefully we can put that group together and talk about that work plan, because, you know, I think the first thing that, and I think perhaps the most challenging thing we're going to have to deal with is defining what we really mean by the problem. You know, increasing residential capacity. What does that mean? What are we really trying to do? And I think that will be the first and probably major question that we have to deal with. I think once we do that, you know, and build some trust and rapport amongst the various interests, I think we can move on to the, you know, to the other steps in this process, you know, much more directly and efficiently. So, you know, I hope to be able to work with Ben here over the next month or so to see if we can hammer out who we want to see on that committee. Again, I think it needs to be broader than what we had in in the public outreach committee that, you know, did all that work, and they're great. And some of them have said that they'd be willing to continue, and others have said they're not so much interested in that particular issue. They were more interested in the public involvement questions. So there's some work to do there. I'm anxious to move it ahead. And Mike is still, I think you're still with us on this, Mike, if I remember correctly.
Oh, yes, absolutely, Jeff. Whenever the need is to reconvene, develop more stakeholders or whatever the process will be, I'm on board with the increasing the residential capacity subcommittee.
Yeah, I think part of our thinking was, you know, trying to pull together a new committee in August and before school really gets rolling in September. It's to be kind of problematic in terms of generating that interest. But I think if, you know, we're in October, November, I think we ought to be able to hit the road and get some work done.
Okay, you have a hand, Madam Chair.
All right. Is that Mary?
Yes.
Hi, Mary.
You know, you all just went through all that public involvement stuff, and I think one of the first things on that public involvement paper was, why are we doing this? And so I would ask that you have a committee named Increasing Residential Capacity. And the first question that comes to my mind following your public involvement guidelines is why? Why are you doing this? Who is it benefiting? Is it benefiting your local people who have invested in their community? Or are you building supply, residential supply, for people who are just looking to move here and have no vestiture at this point in their community? It's your local people who need affordable housing. And you know, what kind of residential stock are we talking about? Are we talking about $400,000 or $500,000 homes? Or are we talking about a home that somebody who's earning $30,000 or $40,000 or $70,000 a year can afford? So yeah, I think it's a bit presumptive to say increasing housing stocks until you know, do you actually have to increase housing stock, and what kind of housing stock, and who's going to be able to afford it? So just a couple of things that come to mind when I heard you all talking. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary.
Mary, I think that certainly speaks to the complexity of defining the problem, or, you know, the why of what we're doing here. And, you know, those are all good points. And I think all of those will come to the table for discussion once we have that committee together, and we'll have to hammer out the why. And like I say, I think that will be perhaps the most challenging aspect of this whole exercise.
Yeah, and you all might want to include other people in it, or other communities like North Bonneville and Home Valley and Carson.
Thanks, Mary. There's
Welcome.
nothing. Thank you. If there's nothing else on the residential capacity, we can move on to utility service outside city limits.
Yeah, so this is just an update. We have had that conversation with the city council. Councilmember McHale has agreed to serve as the council's lead on that. And so I'll be working with her on scoping out that as an issue and the next steps moving forward with that issue. You all had a request to relate utility services outside city limits to a document called the WIRA 29A detailed implementation plan. I'll do what I can on this, but the state, well, as Mary talks about too, water is life, and the state understands that water is life, and so it's probably a couple decades old. now the state has asked people to investigate how much water there is in their streams, how much of that water is devoted to water rights that can be used for out of stream uses. And they're also acknowledging that the stream, the flow within the stream has benefits for the state, benefits to fish, benefits to recreationalists who might go tubing on a river and don't want to see that river go dry. And so this study of how much water is available in streams is compared with the amount of water that can be taken out of a stream and used for out of stream uses. And the effort intends to then set an in-stream flow, which is a water right for the stream itself. And so that future water rights need to they'll be reviewed to make sure that there's still water for the senior right holders, somebody like the city who has rights to the streams provided for municipal purposes, irrigators like an apple orchard that might be drawing water out for the apples, and then the in-stream flow for that stream. New water rights need to maintain water for all those uses. Much of the state's effort on that has been halted based on a recent Washington Supreme Court decision. And so I don't know exactly where it's going from here. So some communities have these in-stream flow water rights. We never got to the point where ecology adopted those for our region. And there's a question whether it will be adopted. Regardless of that, we have a detailed implementation plan for our waters up and down, well, in our area. Overall, that area covers a great deal of Skamania County. How that relates to water service outside city limits, it largely has been dealt with in terms of the city's water system plan. When we went through the water system planning effort, we evaluated the demand for water by the community and growth in the community, and whether we have the water rights and capacity to serve at this point. And so in establishing that demand, we turn back to things like the detailed implementation plan to say, look, there's the whole section up here along the Kanaka Creek Basin where there's not a lot of water that's being found, and permit exempt wells. That's something I might need you to step in on, Jeff, and explain some of that. But permit exempt wells still draw water, and if there's not water to be had, then they'll ask the city for water. And we see that on an anecdotal basis. There are a lot of existing homes up there whose cisterns and wells run dry at various times of the year, and they're asking the city, can we connect to your system? Currently, the answer is no. But we have a plan for how to provide that service, and we have the capacity to provide that service. So that effort from the detailed implementation plan showed that there's a need for the municipal agency to provide waters where people won't be able to draw water from the ground or from streams, and the city's efforts act on those recommendations.
How many requests are you getting, Ben? I mean, how many people have come in and like recently as this issue's come up?
I would say we get 2 to 3 a year.
Okay.
Sometimes it's the same person every year.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Well, one of the things when we put together the WIRA 29 detailed implementation plan was that if you were extending water to someone who already had a permit exempt well, they would basically have to surrender and decommission that well. And that would augment the city. The city would then pick up that portion of that right, that water right. So that the city would be somewhat compensated in terms of having additional supply to be able to meet that demand. The city has rather generous water rights right now. And even though it doesn't fully utilize those as a municipal corporation, they're referred to as an inchoate right. So they don't lapse like a normal right would after 5 years of non-use. In other words, if August had a water right on Kanaka Creek, for example, and he didn't use that for 5 years, that water right would no longer be valid. Or if he only used a portion of it, then that right becomes less. So the stream flows are an issue. If you set a right for a stream, then any subsequent water right cannot infringe upon that in-stream flow. And we did some modeling in terms of what we thought the impact was of houses both on permit exempt wells and not on it, and also on municipal water systems, what their impacts were on stream flows, and calculated that. And so we have some idea in terms of how much water is available for those future needs. The other complicating factor in this area is geology, which we have fractured basalt. And you can have one landowner can drill a well and find plenty of water at 80 feet, and another one might drill a well to 1,000 feet and be just a few hundred yards away and not get anything. So water availability is also, particularly for a well, somewhat variable just given the geology of this particular area. So there is going to be that demand, I think, as you see those residential developments move ahead. I think one of the things about having a watershed plan, even though it wasn't formally adopted into rule, it does recognize on the behalf of the Department of Ecology that water is available up to a point. And that's one of the first tests for a water right. If there's no water available, then ecology won't even consider issuing a water right. And then they'll look at, is it a beneficial use? Is it in the public interest? But unless you can meet that initial demand of water availability, you just don't proceed through that process at all. So that watershed plan did get ecology to agree that a certain specified amount of water is probably available out there.
Thank you, Jeff. That's interesting. And this, I imagine this topic's it's only gonna become more pressing, I think, as we move along. Imagine you'll probably get more people coming in asking that same question. So is what staff is helping you with this, Ben, or working through this issue? Is it?
It's a team effort. So I'm leading that discussion with Councilmember McHale, and then we'll pull in Public Works Director Carl and City Administrator Liana to talk about things as we go to. But at the high level, the city has the water rights and the capacity to serve, and the landowners adjacent to the city don't. There's something called a closed basin. And so if there is insufficient water falling within a basin to provide the stream flows that would benefit the public uses there, then ecology will say no more water rights will be issued from this basin.
Okay. Oh.
And part of the implementation of this at the statewide level that led to the Washington Supreme Court's decision was that permit exempt wells, or the approval of development that would require permit exempt wells, was not recognizing that development might impact a closed basin, or it might impact those in-stream flows. And so the system, the land use approval system in those communities has really had to alter to have some analysis of what this is going to do to those stream flows that it impacts. And that all of how that is implemented is still being worked out for those communities that have these closed basins. We're not in that stage because there's no official rule, but there's still issues to deal with for that type of development on the city system. We're doing that calculation based on our capacity to serve, so we don't have to deal with that quite as much.
Yeah, most of those closed basins are in the Puget Sound area. The legislature passed a law, allow them to go back and rework watershed plans. And if they can't reach a local planning committee, if they can't reach agreement, then it comes back to the Salmon Recovery Funding Board to do a technical review and make the decision. I think we have five areas where they were unable to make a decision, and now we're on the hook for a technical review. Water is, it builds on what Mary said. Water is a very contentious issue. If you have it, if someone else wants it, if someone else needs it, it's like Mark Twain said, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, if no one has any other comments, is that Mary? Do you have a comment?
This is just a quick comment from Mike. The one thing I think Ben brought up there, and maybe Jeff did as well, but something to keep in mind is that single family residences, private residences don't have to obtain a water right. The personal well is exempt from needing to have a water right. So people that are expanding outside of the city limits, they don't need to secure a water right from anybody to drill a well. It's all about a matter of cost and how much inconvenience will be for them to drill the well deep enough to get the water. And moving forward, I think extending water services outside of the city limits is a very civic-minded thing that the city of Stevenson, if it has the capacity to do so, would be a worthwhile venture. And like Jeff mentioned, with the trade-off process of trying to balance out the intakes and draws from the water table, it may not be as detrimental as people may assume or envision. This extending the water services outside of the city limits would be on Stevenson's long-term water rights and water availability.
I don't know, Mary, is your hand up? Or is that from before?
Can you hear me?
Oh, there, go ahead,
Hi.
Mary.
The biggest question is, civic mindedness aside, is how much would it cost and who's going to pay for it? And are you going to ask the citizens of Stevenson to subsidize people who shouldn't be building where they're building? If you go up Kanaka and if you went down Baker at one point, everybody had water. And then new houses started being built up there, and suddenly no water in August and July. So, people make their own troubles sometimes, and it doesn't mean that you always have to dig them out of it. And also along Mile Road on that new subdivision across the street there up Kanaka, people have to put in bladders and storage bins for their water. So why were they allowed to build there? Is the county responsible for finding out how much water there is available instead of saying, yes, build, and then we'll provide you with water? Well, no, they're not, because only the city has water at this point. So, there's some very basic questions that need to be answered. And I think the first one is, why are people building in places where they're not going to have enough water to exist on? Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. That was going to be one of my questions, Ben, is, if you're having to dig up road and run a water line, I mean, I assume you guys are kind of working through the economics of that at this point, correct?
Yeah, I forget exactly what's in that draft language, but it talks about the developer's responsibility to extend for that.
Okay, great. Looking forward to seeing that. All right.
Say, Mike, I have a question. I have a question for Mike. Mike, in issuing a building permit, is the county required to assure that water is available before issuing that permit?
Yes, that's correct, Jeff. A water adequacy verification has to be completed before a building permit can be issued for new home construction. And I don't know how it works inside the city limits, but in the county generally, water adequacy verification is required, or you can't get a building permit.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have to second what Mary was saying. There's somebody on Baker who, I guess, collecting rainwater in a number of barrels, and I think that's a no-no.
No, legislature changed rules to allow.
Did they?
Yeah, it was until 10 years ago.
Oh, interesting.
Kind of sounds like the city should be extending some water services and putting it on these people if they would like to get water up Baker or up Kanaka Creek. The special assessment fee to deliver water to people on Kanaka Creek inside the city limits or out seems like that would help alleviate these problems. Water is definitely an issue, but having a municipal water supply helps alleviate the concerns of not having water in July and August.
All right, if there are any other comments, I think we'll move on then to the, what is it, we on Feely short plat.
Yeah, you guys were presented this one in in July. Left that decision to staff. Staff reviewed that, approved that, and it's recorded already. So this was a rare example of one that was extremely fast for the applicant between the application period and recording of the plat. They were able to get a lot of that done. So there are 2 lots up there on Upper Willard Street now, where last month there was only 1. So that one's done. Conditional use permit reviews. So you all attach review periods to conditional permits you've issued over the past 2 years, and October is generally when those happen. So I'll dig through those and see if there are any that are scheduled for October of this year to do that review period, and evaluate whether you need to take a deeper look at that, whether it's having any unanticipated neighborhood impacts. You could attach additional conditions to it. You could remove conditions, modify conditions, attach a new review period to things if you do decide to dig in. So expect that the next time. I'm also anticipating a new conditional use permit to be requested. And so if that comes in, then you should expect a quasi-judicial hearing at your next meeting. And then just today, we received a zoning text amendment request. And so I'll review that to make sure everything's complete about that, and do a kickoff report for you all at the next meeting related to that. And that'll give us a chance, even if it's not officially adopted at that meeting, to muddle through what the new public involvement expectations might look like and how we'll start on that. So also potentially at that October meeting, the Shoreline Master Program could appear on your agenda. I've included for you here some suggested changes that I've made to Department of Ecology. Follow me, please, on what this feedback loop is. So you all went through the effort in 2018 to finalize a recommendation to the City Council. City Council reviewed that recommendation, accepted that that's the city's proposal to send to Department of Ecology. Ecology has to review that to make sure that our plan is in compliance with the Shorelines Planning Act and with the implementing guidelines from Ecology. They'll be issuing a list of required and recommended changes to our plan. And I've got a discussion with them about what that list might look like in the middle of this month, toward the end of this month. And in advance of that, I took a look through the plan that the City Council has suggested and asked Department of Ecology if they think that these changes might benefit things. So in some things, it's a jargon amendment like the Shoreline Management Program versus the Shoreline Master Program. SMP, it should stand for Shoreline Master Program. So that's one change that's very small. There's Scrivener's errors that are corrected. The two biggest potential changes that if ecology returns this to us and says, we're recommending that you make these changes, would be in chapter 5, where each description of a use has a location description. In reviewing that again, after setting it aside for a couple of years, I feel like that's a relic of some other Shoreline Master Program that's been made irrelevant by ours because of the use table that we have at the head of chapter 5, where we're saying that in these shoreline environment designations, this is a conditional use or a permitted use. In the preamble to that table, we say that any conflicts between the table and the text of the SMP, the text prevails. And so there may be a case where in the location description, some of the hard work that you did when you were considering the table of where uses should be conditionally allowed or permitted or excluded would be overridden by the text, which you spent less time on when you did that review. And so asking them whether those location descriptions are necessary, and if not, to remove those, to remove that potential for inconsistency between the two. The other part where there's a lot of red, or in this case blue, on a document is in the definition section. There were several definitions that we had that had already been defined in the Shorelines Management Act or in the Ecology Washington Administrative Codes. And so instead of just repeating that definition, or in some cases, our definitions weren't consistent with those definitions, there's just a reference to them. I'm asking them to see if they agree that that would benefit our code for a couple of reasons. The first being that it would shorten this just by referencing it. The second being that it would ensure consistency with administrative code and revised code of Washington, and that it would ensure consistency over time. So we are to review these every 8 years and make amendments if our SMP isn't consistent with any changes to those codes. So in this case, consider if the Washington Administrative Code section updated its definition of wetlands, and we had included a verbatim definition here, we'd have to amend that. By just referencing it, we wouldn't have to make an amendment at some point in the future. So those are the two biggest things, and we'll see what Ecology says about this, whether they turn around and recommend making these changes. But if they do, those began in City Hall. So that was not really deep dive, but you will be getting the list of required and recommended changes from Department of Ecology. When we do, you'll get that. The remaining members of the Shoreline Advisory Committee will get those changes, and we'll try to process it through like we did in the last one, where we've got the board, and we'll do a red light, green light situation, whether this is specifically for the recommended. We have to do the required ones, so we won't spend any time on that. But for recommended changes, do we agree with that on its face? Do we want to talk about it? So the more green lights we have, the less we need to talk in depth about. And then for the red lights, we'll talk in depth until we decide whether to include the recommendation or not. So.
Thanks, Ben. So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it'll be a busy fall.
Okay. So this will be on the agenda, you think, in October?
Depends on the turnaround times.
Okay.
It could be October, it could be November.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for giving us a preview. Gives us an opportunity to look at it before the meeting. So that's great. All right. I'm not looking at the agenda, Ben. I was looking at the document. Is there anything else?
No, that was the last one.
Oh, that's the last one. All right. Unless anybody has anything else, we'll adjourn for the evening. All right. I don't see any hands up. Okay, good night, everyone.
All right.
Good night.